Welcome everyone to another episode of the Ultimate Supply Chain Podcast. I'm Louise Barber, Global Head of Marketing at DHL Supply Chain and your host for this series. I'm delighted to be joined today by Dr. Knut Alicke, who's partner at McKinsey and advising clients on supply chain management, the digital supply chain, advanced analytics and supply chain transformation. Dr. Knut is also the co-author of the book From Source to Sold, Stories of Leadership in the Supply Chain. Now, you might recall that we spoke to Radu Palamario, Dr. Knut's co-author, in a previous episode of our podcast. So today it's great to have Knut to speak about the current challenges and opportunities our industry faces, specifically in the realm of digitalization and technology. Knut, welcome to our podcast. We're delighted to have you with us.
Thanks a lot for the invitation, Lou. Very much looking forward to our conversation.
Great. Well, let's kick off. Can you just tell us a little bit about your story? How did you end up in the world of supply chains?
Yeah, very happy to do so. By education, I'm a mechanical engineer. And honestly, I was not so sure whether I should become a mechanical engineer or a musician. And that's why I also tried to study music. At the end, I felt that the world of logistics and supply chain is more interesting than music. So during my master thesis and then afterwards in my PhD, I really got into supply chain and logistics, and that kind of kept me. I started with a startup that was a spin-off of the institute I worked in,
right,
where we did planning software for consumer electronics companies, and that was like more than 25 years ago. We did pretty cool stuff. So sometimes today, I feel that, hey, all the stuff that we implement, that we change, that we do, we had all of this 25 years ago. So that's how I got into it, and then I kind of stick to it. And in McKinsey now since 20 years, working on my favorite topic of supply chain, but working in different industries, kind of globally in different industries, which is interesting, challenging from an intellectual point of view. And still, there's so much work to do out there that I'm really enjoying it.
Amazing. Do you still feel that same challenge of a startup, Knut?
So now kind of McKinsey being a very grown-up company. But within McKinsey, we also have kind of small cells. And here you can really work like in a startup. So you kind of have a topic, and this topic, you feel excited, and then you drive it. Same with our book, right? You mentioned Source to Sold. So Radu and I thought that, hey, that is a very good idea to help the community to develop and help supply chain leaders to understand what does it take to basically reach the board level. So the idea was born, and then as you would expect from a startup, we just made it work.
Made it happen, absolutely. So what were the main learnings that you got from interviewing 26 supply chain leaders in your book?
So it's a very diverse group of supply chain leaders, but they have indeed a couple of things in common, and we even codified this as you would expect a framework, and the chain framework.
Yeah.
So what from the conversation, it was very interesting that we saw all of them were super eager to learn. They were always looking for new challenges. They were kind of, one of the contributors said that she took a Python course last summer as a chief supply chain officer, right? And you like, why do you need to take a Python course? So to learn what all the young generation does, right? And how programming works. Everyone was very eager to explore whether it's new regions, new topics, new industries. And with this kind of building the experience to really think end to end. Very diverse backgrounds. They all had, so to say, a stint in supply chain in their careers, and then developed either as a chief supply chain officer or a CEO or a COO. They were all very nice people. Clearly, otherwise we would have not interviewed them.
Definitely.
And it was very exciting to listen to their individual stories. So that was nice. And if I just kind of go into this chain model, because
Sure.
It kind of summarizes the learnings. So it's really kind of see like in a collaborative. So hey, we work together, and that's both internally and externally. it's age like in holistic. So we need to understand the big picture. We need to understand end to end. One of my clients, one of the contributors to the book, said that the head of supply chain is kind of the only person next to the CEO that really looks end to end. And
Sure.
there's some truth to that. We then had during the lockdown, we had to be adaptable. So that's also very important for supply chain people. We always need to kind of go with the new challenges. We need to be influential. We need to kind of make sure that we empower people. And then for me, even the most important is narrative. So we need to be able to tell the story of supply chain in a way that everyone understands, including the board member, including our grandparents.
And I think that's one of the things, Knut, that I would say sets your book aside from other books. Let's face it, there are quite a few books out there about supply chains recently. But I think one of the things that really sets yours aside is the fact that everybody you speak to tells a story. And you really get the impression that if you spend any significant time with any one of the 26, it would be interesting, it would be informative, and you'd have a bit of fun. I love your chain model. I think it's great. I try to live by it. There are one or two of them that I struggle with, I've got to be honest, but I love it. And listeners, if you haven't read it, get it and read it. It's a great read, not just informative, but as I say, it's educational and it's an entertaining read. So please do. Could you put your finger on one thing that was similar across all of them? You've talked about the fact that, that they're all quite interesting. They all had similar backgrounds. Most of them had been in some sort of supply chain role before they elevated to either a senior supply chain role or a CEO type role, Knut. But is there one thing, maybe one characteristic or one behavior that you saw fairly consistently throughout your time researching the book?
So one topic, and also comparing this to other people where we did not see that in other functions, is really this idea of end to end or holistic, as we put it in the chain model. So supply chain people always are interested in understanding sales and marketing and understanding procurement, sourcing, understanding R&D and finance. So really to cover everything and bring everything together. And if you understand that, or let's say if you're curious to understand it, then only you're able to understand what is the trade-off we are making. And you are able to evaluate the trade-off. That sounds simple. And everyone will say that, yeah, sure, I do that. But if you look into the reality of companies, at the end, you always have your silos, right? And this is what really sets these leaders, these end-to-end leaders apart, that they kind of bring everything together from the customer to the supplier and understand where should we go in terms of trade-off. Should we go more towards service, more towards cost, more towards inventory?
And did you get the impression that those decisions were made because of the market conditions or because of preference or because of individual customer positioning, or what drove those decisions in the majority of occasions? So
I would say we did the interviews during the lockdown,
right?
And that was clearly I would say a catalyst for end-to-end decisions. Very, very clear, so people would understand it. But in the interviews, we also kind of went back and we heard from one of the contributors that, hey, in my company, was a consumer electronics company, we always complained about bad forecast accuracy. And he said, hey, we are here to deliver to the customer. So if the bad forecast accuracy is the bad forecast accuracy, then we need to do something else. Yeah. We need to make sure that we get this in control, but not only complain, right? So also here you could see that they really kind of took the challenge and developed something that would help them to improve the end-to-end performance significantly.
Another interesting thing I found in your book, it's interesting that you talk about your background as a mechanical engineer. There's quite a few engineers in your book. And when I think about our own business, quite a few of our senior colleagues come from an engineering background. So I guess that ability to think small and big. Engineering is very precise, but equally normally has a very broad impact.
The combination is super important. And this is also what we see working with our clients, and also what we heard from the contributors. to see the big picture, but at the same time being kind of interested in, let's say, the analytics, the numbers, the details, helps a lot, right? Because then you can, only then you're able to prove that you're able to implement. Because you can go down to the shop floor, so to say, and give guidance, but at the same time, you kind of put this into a bigger picture and say, hey, this is the direction we should go. With an engineering background, you normally start with a kind of a detail, let's say models, algorithms, and so on. And that is something that you need to then kind of build and learn, that you kind of understand, hey, this is the overall strategy, this is the direction we are going, this is how I am motivating people. But if you manage this, if you master this, as we could see from the contributors, then this is very, very successful.
And it gives you such credibility at all levels, doesn't it? I'm always fascinated and very proud when I get to spend time with senior members of our team. When they're abroad, when they're visiting sites, these guys really can have conversations with every level within the organization in a relevant, but also with such integrity. This isn't something they're doing from a PR perspective. They're really interested in what makes that go from here to here and how has that changed.
And that is super important in my experience, that the CEO, the COO, Chief Supply Chain Officer, is able to come to a warehouse and talk to the people, go to the picker that is just completing an order and have a conversation with these people. Because oftentimes you see that the CEO would not do that, sometimes because they're afraid that the shop floor people ask relevant questions they cannot answer. So if you have this ability to really talk the shop floor language, then it's much easier to convince.
We were recently in Dubai. We had a global conference, very senior people there, and we did just that. We toured one of our sites in Dubai, and it was all very carefully planned and overran horribly for that reason, because everybody wanted to talk to the people who were working the site. And as I say, had relevant things to say. And that makes such a difference in an organization where colleagues are the things that make the difference. And, everybody's commitment to getting the end job done and knowing the part they play in it.
Fully agree. And at the end, it's the people in the warehouse that are, I would say, the final touch to the customer. If they fail, then the customer has a bad experience. So super important to have this under control.
Now I've been in supply chain for about 6 years, and even in that relatively short time, I've been amazed at the advances there have been in technology and digitalization and the co-robotics we see within our industry today. What do you think are the imminent challenges that supply chain professionals really need to pay attention to as we progress in that direction?
So we need to move away from individual ideas, solutions. So when we look into let's take a bigger picture of kind of planning solutions, right? There is a lot of stuff that is out there that helps us to plan better. If we look into reality, nearly no one is using this. And why is that? Because we have our good old Excel sheets, right? And then we kind of download everything. We do our planning in Excel and then we upload again. So we need to make sure that we kind of use the technology that is out there in a wise way, but not telling people to use, but we need to also make sure that we understand the change process. Right? In McKinsey, we call it the influence model, where you have kind of 4 elements, right? So you need to make sure that your role model also does this new thing, that you have the capabilities, that you're convinced that this is the right thing, and you have kind of the processes established to do that. Right. Only then change is possible. So this is something where a lot of people fall short, because we are so excited that, hey, there's this new cool stuff. And we'll talk, I guess, about GenAI. This is the hot topic these days. But to make this work, we need to make sure that we also get everyone aligned, right? If you have a colleague who is in the planning department since 25 years and does a good job and maybe even knows how a fax machine works, right? You need to kind of make sure that you also have something for these colleagues to improve their experience and their job, right? And deliver a better result.
Definitely. You mentioned in one of your publications, and I'm going to quote, so forgive me for reading, you said, Gen AI will be similar to the invention of the container in supply chain, radically shifting the way we operate our supply chain. Can we talk about that a little bit?
Very happy. It's one of my favorite topics. And if we step back like 1.5 years ago, when all of these large language models came out and everyone started to use ChatGPT, same with me, right? And the nerd in me kind of immediately used that to solve the traveling salesman problem. So basically, you have multiple locations in the city, and you want to find the shortest path.
Yeah,
and it did not work. And I was like, okay, that's kind of a similar hype like blockchain, which never took off. And then basically a couple of months later, the next version came out, and I tried it again, and I saw that now it's calling up modules, and there's some algorithms out there that it's kind of creating Python code, so you can really use it, and you can solve the problems. So if you take this, and we are always overestimating the impact of technology in the short term, and we are underestimating in the long term. Right?
Yeah.
So kind of the discussions were always like, in 3 months we will solve the world's problem. No, we will not. But if you think 5-10 years out, there will be a significant change. And I always like to describe it in a way that all this GenAI, these large language models, will help us to unnerd supply chain. Also going back to the book, we have a lot of nerds out there that are kind of hiding, so to say, their knowledge, and they are not kind of formalizing their knowledge.
Sure.
So what will the GenAI do? We will have an interface where we can kind of cover all of this nerdy stuff, right? So the planning engines, the algorithms, the machine learning stuff and everything, where the normal planner is more afraid because there's stuff like a standard deviation, square root, and so on and so on. We will be able to cover this with a GenAI interface. And then we will be able to use it in a normal conversation. So, and with this unnerding of supply chain, we will open up this holy grail of supply chain that we love to hide, right? Because that's kind of our asset. We will be able to kind of unfold this and open it up for much, much more people to contribute. So this will be a major shift in how we manage supply chain, and also the results will be much better.
Sure. Do you see any potential for a clash there, Knut, around what we were talking about a moment ago? I agree that in supply chain, the nerds will inherit the earth. Do you see any clash between a nerd's innate desire to understand what makes things work and a consumer's need to trust that the Gen AI does work?
So both have areas where Gen AI will help. The nerd will use Gen AI to help to understand the complex systems better, to really kind of unfold the complexity by asking questions and kind of correlating data and everything, and with this making his or her job better.
Mm-hmm.
The consumer will see, first of all, clearly an impact in better performance in terms of delivery performance, lower cost, but then also the I would say the supply chain consumer, so the one that is not in the nerdy part but still needs to manage the supply chain, will have the ability to manage the supply chain with the Gen AI, as you could say, as an avatar or as a team member, right? Yeah. It will be a team member next to the other teams. It's also very important. We also need to be careful in not going after the vision that we don't need to have any planner anymore. Mm. There's a good example. If you think about, in Germany, we had this hoarding of toilet paper, right, in March 2020.
Yeah.
This thing, every planner would have said that no way that we are going to increase toilet paper consumption by 300, 400, 500%. And this is continuing like this. There's some limit to it, and then it will go down. Whereas the machine has nothing to relate to, right? And would basically predict it's going up forever. So we need to have the contextual knowledge. We have the business knowledge, and to team this up with Gen AI will really, really help. And then, and this is my prediction for kind of in 2, 3, 5 years, then we will really have this end-to-end vision that we all talk about since 25 years, really implemented with the help of these Gen AI models.
Isn't it amazing how how we quickly adapt and get used to these things. And to a certain extent, we personify them. I'll tell you what I mean. When I've been on site, and some of our sites have locus bots to help with more efficient and better picking, to be honest. And we call them names. We give them names. The people that work with them have a preferred bot. And when I first experienced that, I thought, well, that's a little bit strange, but it's not, because you kind of get this slightly irrational trust between human being and machine that you can't quite explain, but there's something quite comfortable about it. Only last week, I noticed that when I use ChatGPT, I start by saying hello. What's that about?
Yes, exactly. It's that's exactly what I meant when I said that it's going to be a part of your team. It's going to be a colleague.
Definitely.
Probably at some point in time, you will also give your chatbot a name.
Yeah.
But indeed, when I kind of do my research and do some chatting with ChatGPT, I also find myself in the situation where I say thank you.
Yes.
Right? And you at some time when I kind of don't get to the answer, I feel that maybe the chatbot is now frustrated, which is clearly not the case. So, but this basically shows that, hey, there is some interaction that is human-like. It's not a human, right? We're very, very clear. We are far away from general artificial intelligence, but it's one step closer. And with this, to come back to the significant change of this supply chain avatar that we are talking about, this will then help to understand and to push much more complex situations.
Yeah, and I think to a certain extent, even our innate desire to personify those machines says something about change management and the fact that, you know, we don't want that uncomfortable, is this the robots taking over the world? Because, I mean, clearly it isn't. And to your point, you're always going to need a planner. You're always going to need someone who is able to provide the input and verify the output.
Fully agree.
How do you assess the readiness of supply chain leaders in companies for this sort of change, especially if the industry is still looking at data quality and accuracy of insights?
So the supply chain leader needs to be curious to learn new stuff, needs to be open for new topics, but still being grounded in reality. Right? So that you don't have the people that kind of dream a dream but have no chance to implement. And to your point on master data challenges, this is kind of, it's like the unwanted child, right? So since years we talk about master data quality, but it feels like such a boring job that no one really wants to take it on, but it's super important. And again, here, if we use technology right, then we can really improve it, right? So the supply chain leader that makes this happen needs to be a combination of a kind of a curious nerd with an experienced person, but even much more important, being kind of the experienced change person. So the person that is accepted by the organization, that kind of walks the talk, and with this makes things happen.
Makes perfect sense. And do you have any examples of supply chain transformation in the digital environment that you'd like to share? Where have you seen best practice emerging?
So we had one example where we had the pleasure to help a client over a period of 5 years to really kind of help this overall transformation. And here to see kind of from the first day when we started with a diagnostic where we kind of found a successful company, but the company not necessarily thinking and breathing end to end and supply chain, but more kind of functional logistics and so on, to now kind of the transition to a company that really thinks end to end. That was amazing, especially as we kind of got live with the IBP process in March 2020. And then something happened that all of us know, right? And they were able to do a scenario planning, to have the transparency, to take decisions that before, no way they would be near to that, right?
Yeah.
So, and that was clearly a booster because it kind of helped them, because everyone saw that, oh, this is now really working and it helps us to navigate through the crisis. And here, And it was a very interesting combination of process design, of the I would say digital backbone to make this work, but then also a lot of capability building, a lot of change management to make sure that that we take all of the organization with us, right? So to give you one example, we had we saw that the topic of supply chain was just not well known, and so we did some foundational trainings for roughly 9,000 people, right? And with this kind of getting I would say the idea into people's head that, hey, here's something interesting, significant, and we need to be part of this.
Yeah, I guess it's that perfect storm, black swan, those things that come together. At the time, you may not think they're particularly positive, but with the benefit of hindsight, they've given us such a catalyst for change. And I guess such confidence that we're able to adapt, adopt, survive, and even thrive in the face of such adversity. It is quite amazing, actually. I guess our children will look back and see that as a point in time that really did change the way the future developed.
Fully agree.
So what's your advice, Knut? How should companies prepare for future disruptions in supply chains? What do you see on the horizon?
So first of all, it's very important to understand that the next disruption is not necessarily something we had in the past. That's unfortunately a bit challenging for a lot of people, because they always ask, but whatever, when the Ever Given got stuck in the Suez Canal, why did we not predict this? It's just the nature of that, such a black swan event that you cannot predict. You know that something will happen, so we need to make sure that we prepare, that we have the levers in place, that we have the transparency in place, and we set up our supply chain for resilience. Very important. I feel that sometimes the boards have a memory of 6 months, right? So because we have a lot of discussions these days on kind of inventory reduction and so on, but not necessarily on resilience. So see supply chain resilience as the insurance to kind of navigate through the next crisis. Because in your car insurance, you also don't want to have a car insurance because you expect to have an accident in 2 weeks.
The unexpected.
The unexpected, exactly. And this is the same thing for supply chain resilience. It's a board topic because most operational managers look at the next 3 months, the next 12 months. So it's a board topic. And here, make sure that you're prepared for the next disruption that will come. And with this, have the right agility, the right capabilities, the right transparency, and ability to react fast.
Great advice, Knut. I've got a final question for you. You mentioned that you had a choice between supply chain and music. What's your instrument?
I play the saxophone, so I studied jazz saxophone.
Wow!
And there's even we now with a colleague who was kind of at a similar point, and he did play the trumpet. We even recorded a bit of kind of a short piece with four songs, jazz standards, that we did this like 11 years ago, and it's on Spotify. So
no
you can listen to
Send
it.
Me I would love to hear that. I would love to hear that. I too very nearly became a professional musician, but what strikes me about you is jazz. That's interesting because it takes massive discipline, but at the same time is unstructured. And only the best musicians who have studied, probably classically, can play jazz. It's all in a framework, isn't it?
That's indeed right. And quick side story. So when I had to defend my habilitation, that's kind of the post-PhD thing in Germany you need to do to become a professor. I kind of suggested to talk about the similarity of logistical and musical sequencing problems. And long story short, if you kind of look through that, a jazz combo is like a kind of an online scheduling problem.
Yeah.
Right? And there's a lot of similarities here. So you have a common ground with this, which is kind of harmony, rhythm, and so on. And you interact, right? And this interaction is kind of like in our planning or supply chain world, is like online scheduling, right? Because you react to some events that happen. And you also have an interesting objective function, because as a jazz musician or as a musician, if someone applauds to you, right, then you know that, hey, there was something great that I did, right? And sequencing,
Triggers.
you have also an objective function. You also do something great. So it's interesting. It's an interesting combination.
It really is. And, you make me think, talking about that, we constantly talk about supply chain orchestration, and being in marketing, the word orchestration comes up. Now, everybody thinks they've come up with this great description of what we do. And I often try and think, is it orchestration or is it more like jazz? Orchestration feels a little bit too ordered for me. And I think when I see the best supply chains, they're like jazz. It's almost innate.
I fully agree, because you interact on the spot. Right? So if you think about a classical orchestra, so you have kind of, it's very clear what happens in a jazz band. It's always different. So you interact on the spot to your colleagues, and two pieces are never the same because there's improvisation in there. So I would agree that it's more like a good functioning supply chain is much more like a well-organized jazz combo.
Maybe that could be the subject of your next book.
Maybe.
You're welcome. Knut, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure talking to you, and lots of rich food for thought for our colleagues right across the industry. And thanks so much to all our listeners, whether you're joining us on our website, on Spotify, or on any other podcast hosting platform. Please keep an eye out on our social media podcast channels for the next episodes, and do let us know the subject matters you'd like us to cover in the future. Thanks so much.
Thank you.